We want sort of non-complicated patients, right? We want people that have no other sort of illness or no other what we call comorbid conditions. And does everyone, have you all heard that word before? Comorbid means things that we have like hypertension, we're overweight, we have diabetes. And so the average patient that we see in the cancer center, how many comorbidities do you think the average cancer patient has? There's no wrong answer. 3? A little higher, almost 4. So that means that the clinical trials that we do, we also need to get more population-based, right? We need to have real people in trials so that we can actually understand how that works for the majority of people who are over 65 and have 3 to 4 comorbidities. And I guarantee you that there's very little research if you go and do a lit search where you'll find research that's being done in people over 65 with 3 or 4 comorbidities. And so why are clinical trials important? Well, the first reason is that if we don't do anything different today, cancer treatment's not going to change. So everything sort of stays at a standstill. And I don't think any of us would be okay if we were just status quo. So clinical trials allow us to hopefully tackle some of those questions and obviously change the way we identify cancers, treat cancers, and hopefully prevent cancers. So there's, in any given year, especially this is current data, you have more than 500,000 people expected to die of cancer in the US just in this year. That's not okay, it's 1,500 people a day, and this gives us a real motivation to want to make a change. But look at the last bullet. Only 3% of US adults who have cancer actually participate in clinical trials. Now at academic centers, we strive for higher numbers than that, but this number is not okay because what that means is that we're not accelerating research to the point where we're going to make change faster. And so we'll talk a little bit about that timeline because for many of us who work in cancer research, we would like to accelerate that timeline. So you heard from Dr. Welch a very nice description kind of how cancer works and how it happens. But one of the other things that happens is that we can't just say, oh, well, we have a cool drug that's on the market and we want to just all of a sudden put it into, humans. It has to go through years of research in a laboratory. It has to have animal models. And you heard some other words, and it's nice that you have a dictionary of terms, because one of the things that we want to do first is try things out in an animal to see, okay, if we give you X drug or if we do Y intervention, what should we look for as a response? And we call those response biomarkers. So how do we know that what we're doing is making a difference to the tumor? Is it stopping it? Is it slowing it down? Is it killing it? And so we have to look to the animal first to say, hey, what are we going to look for that's a response biomarker? And then we want to translate that to see if there's a human marker that's the same. So you use animals to inform how we would research these different interventions in humans. Then it goes into different phases of trials, which we'll talk about, and then eventually into a clinical setting. So how long do you think that this entire process takes on average? 10 years. Okay. Anyone else? Cheryl, do you want to chime in? No, that's okay. You can. Right. So I asked Cheryl, specifically, sorry, Cheryl, how many years? So we heard 10 years that this would take from the audience, and usually it's more than that. It's 10 to 20 years, or even longer. So you have some drugs that are very old drugs that then we also can repurpose or try in different populations. So this entire process can take decades and cost millions and millions of dollars. So is this a sustainable model if we want to accelerate the way that we identify, treat, hopefully cure, and prevent cancer? No, this is not a sustainable model. So we have to think about creative ways, targeted ways, and much more efficient ways that we are able to deliver clinical trials. So cancer's broken up into cancer clinical trials into different types of phases. And so what basically phases of clinical trials are developed for is to take us through that process in a very logical, very safe, and thoughtful way so that we can look first off at phase 1, which are small numbers of patients. These are usually done with therapies that we're trying to figure out what's the best way to deliver an agent, what's the best dose. So we do a lot of dosing studies where you look to see if we give the first 5 patients 5 milligrams. Is that safe? Is it tolerated? So you're looking very heavily at very specific types of populations with very specific issues, or sometimes it's garden variety. So we have some phase 1 clinical trials where it's really all types, but maybe there's a similar biomarker. So remember, I used the word, how do we find a kind of a marker that will allow us to know if a change is happening? Maybe it's 5 different types of cancer, but all the patients have the same biomarker. And so you want to do dosing, you want to do how are we delivering the agent or the intervention, and then you want to look at a lot of different safety factors. How are the patients responding? Do they get rashes? At what doses? What types? So you collect an enormous amount of information, and then a lot of times also, if it's a drug study, we're collecting bloods along the way too. So a lot of patients, if they've ever participated in a phase 1 trial, which I've actually done one in a prevention drug, and they took blood on every 30 minutes for 8 hours. So you may say, well, that sounds kind of miserable, but they put a nice little line and they keep drawing your blood and they give you games to play and you do work. So clinical trials really are informative from the early phase of figuring out if it's safe and how to deliver it to then the next phase where now we know it's safe, we have a good delivery mechanism. So we're going to look at it in a larger population. And this can be usually anywhere from under 100 patients to maybe a little bit more. And now you want to look at it, is it effective? So you really want to ask the next question is, if we do give this to patients with colon cancer or breast cancer, or as a preventive for any of these types of cancers, are we getting a change in that biomarker that would lead to hopefully a reduction, a decrease, or whatever it is we're trying to explore? And then it has to go to phase 3, which is where usually FDA approval comes along with it. So that means now we're trying it against sort of the standard of care. And the one difference between cancer clinical trials and many others is that patients don't ever not get something. So patients are like, but don't you get placebos? And yes, we do use placebo, but it's used usually as a companion to standard of care. So you'll look, a placebo is a sugar pill. It could be what we call kind of a sham intervention. So one of our colleagues did a sham acupuncture intervention, which you may say, well, how do you do that? So they still stuck needles in, but they were not in sort of therapeutic points of the body. So you want to give an intervention that won't cause harm, but also allows you to see if the thing that you're studying, whether it be acupuncture, a drug, or whatever type of intervention, is going to be effective against the standard of care. So placebo is usually in combination with whatever else is the standard of the time. And then very few trials get to a phase 4 because that's not very common. So the first 3 really are what we try to focus on. But this is one of those reasons why it takes a long time, is because you have to go through each of these phases in order to get to phase 3, where most of FDA approval comes. Now there's been a lot of fast track happening, so we do have the ability sometimes to get drugs into the market from phase 2 trials, but that's usually in more rare cancers or things where we really need some acceleration based on maybe the smaller population or need for a therapy in that particular type of patient population. So this diagram is really meant to take it to the next level, where on the left side, this is how we kind of traditionally have treated patients. You have breast cancer, you have colon cancer, you have lung cancer, you get treated with this specific type of treatment path. That's it, one size fits all. So today, it's not like that. My practice, I get to work with patients who have family histories, and we do a lot of genetic testing. Well, genetic testing is becoming more and more common, not just because you have a family history, but because you have colon cancer, lung cancer, melanoma. And we're doing testing both on the tumor, on sometimes the blood or things that circulate in the blood. And then we do testing based on kind of those things that you can inherit that Dr. Welch talked about as well. But this tumor testing is really driving that path on the second kind of column, in the right column, which is we want to give the right drug to the right patient at the right time. We don't want to give everybody the same drug. We want to give them what specifically will hopefully target their kind of cancer, specific biomarkers, and then hopefully what is most specific to the type of treatment that they can also tolerate. So patient choice is also now part of that. And that's something called shared decision making, which is an important part of that discussion. So it's not just us telling you what you should do, it's us having a bi-directional discussion of what's best for you based on your choices and based on your preferences. This is the map we use here at the University of Kansas Cancer Center, and we put this into place in about 2006. And this is really meant to also show you all the opportunities for where we can do clinical trials. We do trials before individuals get cancer, screening trials, looking at different types of imaging or different types of prevention drugs like omega-3 fatty acids. Then once someone's diagnosed, then clinical trials are part of that initial treatment plan. And we have clinical trial nurses, and our physicians are all familiar with the different types of trials we would have, and we try to find opportunities for patients. Roundabouts are very purposeful in this map because some patients never leave a treatment phase of care. Some patients leave and come back, and some patients go on to long-term continuity of care. So the important part is we want to have trials at all phases. So the last thing I wanted to cover is why don't we have more patients in clinical trials, and what do we need to do about this? Well, the first thing is that a lot of patients just don't know about trials. And when you're in a busy clinic, and I see my partners do this all the time, they're not always thinking about, oh, which trial? So it really is good to have our team there because we need to remind them of what trials are available. Some don't have access, so we need to increase that footprint so patients have access regardless of where they're treated. They may be afraid, they may have heard things. We really need to normalize and really educate patients on what clinical trials are and their families, because I think that based on the silver tsunami, you have a lot of kids, sisters, brothers, everybody's doing homework for that patient, and so we're not just educating the patient, we're really educating their family, their caregivers, and really everyone that supports them. And they don't know if, oh, does my doctor want me to do that? Should I bring up a trial? And we want to empower patients. I can't tell you how important shared decision making is, and that's from both how do we empower a patient to feel comfortable bringing up questions, not just things that we facilitate with our patients. And then why do we, from the provider side, maybe there's some barriers, right? So sometimes there is a lack of awareness. So we have to constantly be trying to get and push information to our providers. So I encourage patients, if you find something out on clinicaltrials.gov, or if you find something on one of the organizations that you belong to, one of those sites, it's not a bad idea to take that in because it may be something that is appropriate, or we just don't know about it. We have less of this control issue, but we do want to make sure that obviously there's a bi-directional discussion, and control on both sides is important. There's a thought, of how do we work around the standard therapy, and with so much changing in the way we're treating patients right now, it's pretty overwhelming on both sides of the fence. You have very rapid changes because of this genetic testing, because of immunotherapy. You have things coming down the pipe so fast that it's really hard for everyone to keep up. So this is an important part of our responsibility is professional education as well, because we need to be able to care for our patients and their families in the best evidence-based way possible. So I think that, based on what we've sort of discussed today, rapid fire, is that clinical trials are what changes the way we care for our patients, both in prevention, treatment, and survivorship. And we really need sort of this modern family approach to make sure that we have not only access for our patients, but we're really educating and expanding the opportunities so that we can change the paradigm from this 20, 30-year process. How do we make that more efficient, make it more accessible, and obviously make it more sustainable?